Billionaire heir Liam Harrington quietly stepped into one of his father's flagship restaurants to uncover why the numbers didn't add up. But instead of finding corruption, he discovered a disciplined floor manager, Aisha Johnson, secretly taking discarded meals to hungry children after closing. Convinced it was a cover, he followed her, only to uncover a truth that shook everything he believed about success, power, and responsibility. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and make sure to follow because what happened next changed the restaurant forever. The Silver Crest didn't just serve dinner, it performed it. Crystal chandeliers caught the light of every wine glass, scattering tiny rainbows across white tablecloths. Jazz hummed low from hidden speakers, the kind of melody that made people lean closer to each other without knowing why. Out front, couples laughed softly over filet mignon and crème brûlée. Candles flickered, forks clinked, everything moved like a waltz rehearsed 1,000 times. But behind the kitchen doors it was war. Oil popped and hissed across hot steel, knives hit cutting boards in rapid fire. The ticket printer screamed every 15 seconds, spitting out orders like a machine gun. Cooks shouted across the line. Plates slid down the pass. Steam rose thick enough to blur faces, and in the middle of all of it, Aisha Johnson. She didn't yell. She never needed to. Her uniform was pressed, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the kitchen like a general watching the battlefield. She moved between stations with a small notebook in hand, jotting numbers, food output, waste weight, staff tempo. When she spoke it was low and direct, and somehow every person in that kitchen heard her like she'd used a megaphone. Table 12, she said to the grill cook. Cut the portion by 20%. They sent back half the plate last time. He nodded without question. A prep cook winced, flexing her wrist. Aisha noticed before the girl even said a word. She stepped in, took the knife, and finished breaking down the case of carrots herself. No announcement, no scene, just done. What no one in that kitchen knew, not the sous chef, not the dishwasher, not the hostess smiling at the front door, was that Aisha had asked off the morning shift to take her mother to the hospital. She never mentioned it. She clocked in at 4, same as always, and the only sign anything was wrong was the faint shadow beneath her eyes that she'd covered with concealer 2 shades too light. That was Aisha. She carried things no one could see and made it look like she was carrying nothing at all. Her apartment was 14 minutes by bus, if the bus came on time. It almost never did. She walked most nights, cutting through the alley behind the restaurant, past the laundromat that closed at 9, past the check cashing place with the neon sign missing a letter. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, if you counted the one where her brother Miles studied on a laptop so old it took 3 minutes to open a browser tab. The Wi-Fi signal dropped every 10 minutes. He'd learned to type fast between disconnections. Their mother sat in the living room in a recliner that had lost its ability to recline 2 years ago. A dialysis machine hummed beside her, its rhythm low and mechanical, almost like breathing. Almost. Every few minutes it beeped. A thin, weak sound, like it was reminding everyone in the room that time was not free. On the kitchen table, underneath a coffee mug with a chipped rim, sat a hospital bill stamped in red. Final notice. You're pushing yourself too hard, her mother said from the chair, not opening her eyes. I'm just working, Mama, Aisha said, setting a glass of water beside her. Miles looked up from his screen. He didn't say much these days, but tonight he said, quietly, almost to himself, they're locking the tuition account next week. Aisha didn't answer. She opened the fridge, nearly empty. A half-used bottle of hot sauce, 2 eggs, some leftover rice in a container she'd brought from the restaurant 3 days ago. She closed it gently, like closing a wound she didn't want anyone to see. Now let's talk about Liam Harrington. He sat across from his father in an office that cost more per square foot than Aisha's rent for a year, floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk the size of a twin bed, 2 glasses of scotch, 1 untouched. Charles Harrington didn't raise his voice either. But where Aisha's calm came from discipline, his came from power. The kind of calm that didn't need to explain itself. 3 months, Charles said, on the ground, no title, no assistant, you observe, you contribute, and if you demonstrate real strategic value, we end it early. Liam leaned back, smiled, the kind of smile people give when they think the rules don't really apply to them. A restaurant, Dad. Seriously, you want authority? Charles didn't blink. Learn what responsibility looks like first. Liam took the scotch, drank it in one go. In his mind he was already counting the days. 3 months was 90 days too many. He had an MBA from Columbia and a corner office waiting on the 34th floor of Harrington Group's headquarters. 6 months ago, he'd been sitting in on board meetings, reviewing acquisitions, building the kind of resume that opened doors before you knocked. Now he was being sent to count napkins in a restaurant, because his father wanted to teach him a lesson about humility. A word Liam understood in theory, and rejected in practice. He didn't just want to end the 3 months early, he needed to. Every day spent bussing tables and reading inventory reports was a day his peers moved ahead. A day his father's confidence eroded. A day the 34th floor forgot his name. This wasn't a learning opportunity, it was exile. And Liam Harrington did not do exile. He needed a win, something sharp, something strategic, something that would make Charles look up from his scotch and say, "You're ready." And the fastest win in any operation was finding a problem no one else had caught. He found it sooner than expected. 2 days into his assignment, Liam pulled the restaurant's monthly reports, not because he cared about the food, because numbers were the one language he'd always been fluent in. And the numbers at the Silver Crest had a stutter. Food production was high, consistently high. But disposal costs were low, unusually low. If the kitchen was making more food than it sold, the excess had to go somewhere. Trash, compost, donations. But the disposal logs didn't match the output. Someone was moving product off the books. He started watching. It didn't take long. One night, just after closing, he stood near the back hallway pretending to check his phone. Through the stainless steel pass-through window, he saw her, Aisha, wrapping food into containers. Carefully, quietly, not rushed, methodical, like she'd done it 100 times before. She stacked the containers into a cloth bag, wiped the counter, turned off the lights. What Liam didn't see, because he wasn't looking for it, was that every container she packed held food that had already been plated and returned, or prepped in excess and marked for disposal. She never touched anything that could be reserved. She never took a single item the restaurant could still sell. But from where he stood, all he saw was theft, and he smiled, not because he cared about the food. Because in his mind, this was the shortcut: catch a manager stealing, restructure the system, present it to his father gift-wrapped, end the exile, get back to the 34th floor. He tested her the next day. Told the kitchen to overproduce on the sea bass special. No reason given, just make extra. Aisha caught it within the hour. She flagged the overage, adjusted the next day's order, and left a note on the prep board. Do not overproduce without written approval. Liam read the note and tried again 2 nights later, this time with the lamb shank, buried inside a larger prep order so it wouldn't stand out. Aisha found it before the dinner rush. She pulled the excess off the line, recalculated the evening's yield, and told the sous chef to hold future orders until she personally signed off. 2 tests, 2 catches, 0 hesitation. She wasn't sloppy, she wasn't distracted. Whatever she was doing with the food after hours, she ran the kitchen during hours with a precision that made it nearly impossible to slip anything past her. She's smart, he muttered to himself. That makes it worse. That night, just past 10, the back door opened. Aisha stepped out carrying the same cloth bag. She walked with purpose, not fast, not slow. The kind of walk that said she had somewhere to be, and no time to waste. Liam stood in the shadow of the loading dock, hands in his pockets, watching her disappear into the dark. Tonight, he whispered, I'll find out who you really are. He stepped off the dock and followed her into the night. In his eyes, she wasn't a good person. She was an opportunity. The alley behind the Silver Crest smelled like grease and rain-soaked concrete. A street light buzzed and flickered overhead, throwing orange light in stuttering pulses across dumpsters and stacked pallets. Aisha's shoes clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm, unhurried, familiar. She'd walked this route so many times her feet knew where every crack and puddle lived. 30 feet behind her, Liam followed. He kept his distance, hands still in his pockets, phone dark. He told himself this was strategic, surveillance before confrontation. Build the case, then present it. Clean, professional, but his heart was beating faster than it should have for a man just watching someone walk. Good people, he thought, don't sneak out of the back doors. She turned left past the laundromat, right at the church with the rusted iron fence, down a side street where the streetlights gave up halfway and the buildings leaned in like tired old men. The neighborhood changed block by block, less paint, more plywood, more bars on windows. Then she stopped. A gate, black iron, peeling at the hinges. Behind it, a squat brick building with a faded sign. Liam couldn't read from where he stood. He pressed himself against a wall and watched. 3 children stepped out from behind the gate like they'd been waiting. The first was a girl, maybe 9, with tight braids pulled back and a jacket 2 sizes too big. Leah. The second was a boy, hands jammed deep into his hoodie pockets, chin down, eyes up. Marcus. And the third, the smallest, clutched an oversized coat around himself like a blanket. Aisha knelt, not dramatically, not for show. The way a person kneels when they've done it so many times their knees know exactly where to land. She unzipped the cloth bag and began pulling out containers, one by one. She said each name as she handed them out. Leah, this one's yours. There's extra bread inside. Marcus, slow down tonight. Okay, if you eat too fast you'll get sick again. Evan, careful, it's still a little warm. Then she set one container aside, untouched. That's for Amari, she said. If he comes by later, make sure he gets it. Leah nodded like a soldier receiving orders. Liam didn't move. He barely breathed. The scene in front of him didn't match the story he'd been building in his head. He had expected a drop point, a middleman. Maybe someone is buying the food at half price, something dirty, something simple. Instead he watched a woman feed children in the dark, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. But Liam Harrington had not become who he was by trusting what things looked like. She knew, he thought. The certainty hardened inside him like a cement setting. She knew I was behind her from the moment she left the restaurant. She took this route on purpose. She chose this moment to play the saint. He watched her stand, brush off her knees, smile at the smallest boy. Every gesture is precise, every beat timed perfectly. A person this careful at work doesn't get followed for 20 minutes without noticing. This is her version of events. This is the story she wants me to walk away with. And the worst part, the part that made his jaw tighten, was how good it was. If this was a performance, it was flawless. The children's names, the allergy warning, the container was saved for the one who wasn't there. Every detail designed to make him feel exactly what he was feeling right now. Someone this perfect, he thought, is hiding something. He didn't leave. He stayed against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for the moment the mask would slip. It didn't. Aisha zipped the empty bag, stood up, and said something to the children that made Leah laugh, a high, quick sound that echoed down the empty street. Then the kids disappeared back behind the gate, and Aisha turned the way she'd come. She made it half a block before she stopped. Not gradually, not like she was tired. She stopped the way a person stops when they've known something for a while, and finally decide to deal with it. She turned around. You've been following me since the restaurant. It wasn't a question. Liam stepped out of the shadows. For the first time since he'd arrived at the Silver Crest, he didn't have a line ready. No pitch, no angle, just the dull heat of being caught doing something he couldn't quite justify out loud. Silence held the street like a breath no one wanted to release. Aisha studied him the way she studied inventory reports, quickly, completely, without emotion. Then she spoke. If you want to know, come inside. No fear, no apology, no pleading, just the flat, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had run out of energy for pretending things were fine. She turned and walked. She didn't check to see if he followed. He stood there for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then his feet moved before his mind gave permission. The apartment building was the kind of place where the elevator hadn't worked in years, and the hallway lights ran on a timer that gave you about 45 seconds to find your door before everything went black. The stairs smelled like bleach and something older, dampness that had settled into the walls so long ago it had become part of the architecture. Aisha stopped at the third floor, unlocked the door, pushed it open. Warm yellow light spilled into the hallway, thin tired light from a single lamp with a crooked shade. Liam looked at the doorway, then at Aisha. She didn't invite him again. He stepped inside, and what waited on the other side was something Liam Harrington, with all his spreadsheets and strategies and shortcuts, was not prepared for. He went looking for a thief. He found someone feeding the hungry. The ceiling was low enough that Liam, at 6'1", felt it pressing down on him like a hand. Paint peeled from the walls in long, lazy curls, not fresh damage, but the kind that had been peeling so long no one noticed anymore. The air was thick with something medicinal, sharp and faintly sweet, layered beneath the smell of reheated rice and the hum of a machine he couldn't immediately place. Then he saw it, a dialysis machine beside a recliner, its screen glowing green, tubes running to the arm of a woman who looked too thin for the blanket draped across her lap. She opened her eyes when the door closed and looked at Liam with the polite curiosity of someone who hadn't had a visitor in a long time. "Are you a co-worker?" she asked. Her voice was soft, frayed at the edges. Before Liam could answer, a boy appeared in the hallway, 16, maybe 17, slim, serious, with the kind of eyes that had learned to assess strangers fast. Miles. He didn't say hello. He looked at Liam, then at Aisha, then back at Liam. His jaw tightened. "He's from the restaurant," Aisha said, and that was all she offered. Miles didn't move from the hallway. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and the way he held himself, shoulders squared, chin up, feet planted, said everything his mouth didn't. "We don't need anyone feeling sorry for us," Miles said, not loud, not aggressive, just clear, like a fence post marking the edge of a property. Aisha shot him a look. Miles held her gaze for a beat, then disappeared back into his room. The door closed with the controlled pressure of someone who wanted to slam it, but knew the walls were too thin. The kitchen table told the rest of the story. A hospital bill stamped final notice in red ink sat beneath a short glass of water. Beside it, prescription bottles stood in a neat row, arranged with the kind of order that said someone counted every pill. A small plastic organizer, the weekly kind, sat open on Thursday. 2 compartments were already empty. Liam looked at the refrigerator. The door was slightly open, held shut by a rubber band hooked around the handle. Inside, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, a few slices of bread in a bag twisted tight, a carton of milk with tomorrow's date, and nothing else. No luxury, no stockpile, no evidence of anything except a family surviving one day at a time on a budget that had run out of margin months ago. But Liam's mind didn't stop there. While Aisha stood by the counter waiting for him to speak, he was running a second scan. He looked at the coat hooks by the door, 2 jackets, both worn, no designer labels. The shoes lined up by the mat, Aisha's work pair, soles smooth as river stones, and Miles' sneakers, one held together by superglue. No flat screen, no new furniture. The couch sagged in the middle like a hammock. He was looking for the lie. The one crack in the story that would let him keep believing what he'd walked in here believing. A designer purse shoved under a bed, a second phone, a bank statement that didn't match the furniture. A good actress, he thought, would know exactly what to show and what to hide. She'd keep the apartment looking poor. She'd leave the bills out where I'd see them. She'd have the kid play hostile so it felt real. He waited for the inconsistency. It didn't come. Every detail confirmed the same thing, and that was what unsettled him most. Not that the story was convincing, but that it had no seams. Aisha didn't give him a tour. She didn't explain the bills or the machine or the empty fridge. She stood by the kitchen counter with her arms crossed, not defensive, just tired, and waited. "I know what you think," she said. Liam opened his mouth but she kept going. "That food was marked for disposal. At the end of service, every night we throw away 15 to 20 pounds of perfectly good food. Plated returns, overproduction, items past the hold window. I don't sell it. I don't trade it. I take what the restaurant is going to put in a trash bag, and I bring it to people who are going to sleep hungry." She said it the way someone recites a fact. No emotion, no justification, just a sequence of events that she had long ago stopped feeling the need to defend. From Miles's room, the faint sound of typing, fast, rhythmic, then a pause, then fast again. The kid was working around a frozen screen, the same way he probably worked around everything else in this apartment, around the broken things. Through the gaps, there was no angle here, no scheme. Just a woman standing in a small apartment, choosing between the rules of a restaurant and the hunger of people who had no other options. She didn't look away from him. She didn't fidget. The only movement in the room was the steady mechanical pulse of the dialysis machine and the slow rise and fall of her mother's breathing. The silence lasted long enough to become uncomfortable, and then long enough to become something else entirely. Aisha finally spoke again. "Tomorrow I'm going to Hope Haven. The shelter past Lincoln. I do a food drop there on Saturdays." She paused. "If you still want to follow me, you can come. Front door this time." Liam heard it clearly, the dare underneath the invitation. She wasn't asking for trust, she was calling his bluff. His mind ran the calculation the way it always did. If this was real, going with her would confirm it. If it was a performance, a longer observation window would expose the cracks. Either way, he needed more data. But underneath the calculation, something else moved. Something quieter. A thought he didn't want to examine yet. What if there are no cracks? He pushed it down. "Fine," he said. "I'll be there." Aisha nodded once. That was it. No thank you, no relief. She opened the door and waited for him to leave. Outside, the night air hit him like cold water. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. The light behind the curtain went dark. He whispered to himself, barely audible even to his own ears, "Either she's the best actress I've ever seen." He didn't finish the sentence, because finishing it meant admitting the other possibility. And Liam Harrington was not ready, not yet, not tonight, to admit that he might have followed a good person into the dark and mistaken her for a criminal, because it was easier than believing someone could be that selfless without wanting something in return. "I have nothing to hide," she had told him without saying it. "I just have too much to lose." Hope Haven sat at the dead end of a street the city had forgotten to repave. The building was an old community center, flat roof, barred windows, a mural on the side wall so faded you could only make out the hands of the people it once depicted. The parking lot had 3 cars in it, none made after 2010. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "Food distribution, Saturdays 9 a.m. Below it, someone had taped a sheet of paper, "Volunteers needed." The supply room inside was small, lit by 2 fluorescent tubes, one of which buzzed and flickered like it was trying to decide whether to keep living. Shelves lined the walls, half-stocked with canned goods, cereal boxes and bags of rice. A whiteboard hung near the door with a list of names and addresses, families scheduled for the week, written in different colored markers, some circled, some crossed out, some with notes: diabetes, no sugar, baby formula needed, moved, new address pending. Aisha walked in like she owned the place, not with arrogance, with familiarity. She tied an apron behind her back while still greeting people. A woman at the folding table called her name and pointed to a clipboard. A teenager restocking cans gave her a high five without breaking stride. An older man near the loading area just nodded, the kind of nod that carried years of mutual respect. Everyone knew her. Liam stood just inside the door, hands at his sides, looking like a man who had accidentally walked into someone else's life. His jacket was too clean. His shoes were too new. Even the way he stood, straight-backed, chin slightly raised, broadcast a frequency no one here was tuned into. A boy, maybe 7, tugged on a volunteer's sleeve and pointed at Liam. "Who's that man?" The volunteer shrugged. Aisha glanced over. "He's here to help," she said, and handed Liam a crate of apples. "Start sorting. Bruised ones on the left, good ones in the bags, 3 per family." He blinked. No one had given him a task like that. No context, no explanation, since grade school. But he took the crate. As he sorted, Aisha moved through the room with the same precision she used in the restaurant kitchen. She checked labels, adjusted portions, and spoke to each volunteer by name. When she reached the children's section, she crouched beside Evan, the small boy from the gate, and inspected his shoes. "Do these still fit?" she asked. He nodded, but the way his toes pressed against the front told a different story. She wrote something in her notebook and moved on. Then she turned to Liam. "When you bag the fruit for Marcus, no peanuts. He's allergic, anaphylactic. Don't guess, check the label on everything." Liam stared at her. "You remember every kid's allergy?" She didn't answer. She was already across the room, adjusting a stack of blankets. The morning passed in pieces. Liam carried boxes, sorted cans, and tried to stay useful, but every task reminded him how useless he actually was here. He didn't know which families needed what. He didn't know the system, the rotation, the priorities, the unspoken rules that everyone else moved through like water. Halfway through the morning, he saw something he thought he could fix. The distribution line was slow. Families waited 15-20 minutes to receive their bags because each one was packed individually from a central table. Inefficient, obvious. In any business operation, you'd pre-stage the product and run parallel lines. He approached Aisha with the idea laid out in his head like a PowerPoint slide. You could cut the wait time in half if you pre-packed the standard bags and ran 2 lines instead of 1. Separate station for special dietary needs. Basic logistics. Aisha looked at him, then at the line, then back at him. "We tried that," she said, 2 years ago, and people felt like they were on an assembly line, like a product moving through a warehouse. She lowered her voice, not because she was angry, but because she wanted him to hear this next part clearly. "These people come here because they have no other option. The least we can do is look them in the eye when we hand them a bag. The wait isn't a flaw, it's the only part of the process that still feels human." She walked away. Liam stood in the middle of the supply room with his optimization plan dissolving in his hands, and for the second time in 2 days, felt the particular sting of being right about the math and wrong about everything else. Later during the lunch break he found himself sitting on an overturned crate near the back loading dock. An older woman, mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, hands rough from years of work, sat on the crate beside him. She wore a volunteer lanyard that said Donna. She didn't introduce herself. She just sat, unwrapped a sandwich and ate in silence for a while. Then without looking at him she said, "You're the one from the restaurant." Liam turned. "She told you about me." "Didn't have to. You carry yourself like someone who's never been in a room where he didn't belong." She said it without malice, the way you describe the weather. "Aisha's been coming here every week for almost 3 years. Rain, snow, double shifts, didn't matter. She showed up before most of us knew this place existed." She took another bite, chewed slowly. "You know what she did last winter? We lost our food supplier. The contract fell through. 2 weeks, no deliveries, 40 families on the list and nothing on the shelves." Donna looked at him now. She drove to every restaurant in a 5-mile radius and talked them into donating their end-of-night surplus. Personally. On her own time. Didn't ask permission from anyone. Just did it. We didn't miss a single Saturday. Liam didn't say anything. "I don't know why you're here," Donna said. "And I don't care, but I'll tell you this, that woman was feeding people in this neighborhood before you knew she existed. Whatever you think you're figuring out, she figured it out a long time ago." She finished her sandwich, folded the wrapper into a neat square and went back inside. Liam sat on the crate alone, the granola bar half eaten in his hand, and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't name and didn't want to. At one point during the afternoon he pulled out his wallet. He approached Marcus, the boy from the gate, the one with the hands always in his pockets, and held out a $50 bill. "Here," Liam said. "Get yourself something." Marcus looked at the money, then at Liam. Then he stepped back. "We don't take money," he said. Not angry, not proud, just clear. Liam stood there with his hand out, the bill hanging in the air between them like a word that didn't belong in the sentence. He put it back in his wallet slowly, and for the first time in his life he felt the specific sting of offering something valuable and being told it wasn't wanted. He didn't know what to do with that feeling, so he went back to sorting apples. Just before the afternoon rush, Liam was assigned to hand out bags at the front table. A woman approached. young, tired, with a toddler in one arm and a list in her other hand. She asked for her family's allocation. Liam checked the clipboard, found her name, handed her a bag. She opened it, looked inside, and her face fell. "This is for 2, she said quietly. "I have 4 kids. Liam looked at the clipboard again. The entry said a household of 2. He didn't know the family. He didn't know the system well enough to override it. He said, "That's what's listed." The woman didn't argue. She just nodded, the small practiced nod of someone who had learned that arguing with systems never worked, and turned to leave. Aisha appeared beside him. She'd been watching from across the room. "Mrs. Delgado," Aisha called. The woman turned. "Hold on." Aisha checked a separate notebook, her own, not the official one, and pulled 2 additional bags from the reserve shelf. She handed them over without ceremony. "Carlos and Sofia started school last month, right? I updated the count. The main list hasn't caught up yet." Mrs. Delgado's eyes went wet. She mouthed thank you and left with all 4 bags. Aisha turned to Liam. She didn't scold him. She just said, "The list is a guide. The people are the truth." He felt the heat rise in his neck. Not embarrassment, exactly, something sharper. The realization that he'd almost sent a mother of 4 home with half the food she needed because he'd trusted a spreadsheet over a human being standing right in front of him. Just before noon, the front door slammed open. A man stumbled in, unshaven, red-eyed, smelling like last night's liquor and this morning's regret. He was tall, wide-shouldered, and loud. "Where's the food?" he demanded, scanning the room. "I know you got food in here." The room went still. A volunteer near the back pulled 2 children behind her. Evan pressed himself against the wall. Marcus stepped in front of Leah without being asked. Liam's first instinct was sharp and automatic. Call security. Call the police. Remove the threat. His hand went to his pocket, reaching for his phone. Aisha was already moving. She walked toward the man with the same pace she used on the restaurant floor. Steady, measured, unhurried. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tense her shoulders. She looked at him the way you look at someone who is drowning and doesn't know it. "Sir," she said. "There's food for you. Sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "Sit down," she repeated. Same tone, same volume. But something in the way she said it made the air change. "I'll bring you a plate, but you sit first." He swayed. I looked around. The children were watching. The volunteers were watching. Liam was watching. The man sat. Aisha walked to the back, prepared a container, soup, bread, an apple, a bottle of water, and brought it to him herself. She set it on the table in front of him without a word. Then she placed a napkin beside it. A small thing. A human thing. The man looked at the napkin for a long time. Then he started eating. Quietly. Liam lowered his phone. He watched Aisha return to the supply line as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just diffused something that could have turned violent with nothing but her voice and a plate of food. He realized then that what she did at the shelter was exactly what she did at the restaurant. She read rooms. She managed chaos. She protected people. The only difference was that here, no one was paying her. The afternoon wound down. Families came, collected their bags, and left. Volunteers cleaned up. The fluorescent light finally gave out, and no one replaced it because there were no spare bulbs. As the last few people filtered out, a small girl appeared at the door. She wasn't one of the regulars. Liam hadn't seen her before. She was maybe 5, wearing a dress that had been washed so many times. The pattern was just a suggestion. Her eyes were red and wet. She was looking for her mother. A volunteer called out, asked around. No one knew her. She started to cry. Not loud, but steady, the kind of crying that comes from being lost and too young to know what to do about it. Liam stood near the door, frozen. He wanted to help but had no idea how. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived, didn't know the first thing about comforting a child who wasn't asking for money or strategy or any of the things he was trained to offer. But then something happened that he didn't plan. He knelt down. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice came out softer than he expected. The girl looked at him. She didn't answer, but she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm, and held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept moving. They stayed like that, him kneeling, her holding on, until a woman came running down the block shouting the girl's name. The mother scooped her up, breathless, apologizing, and disappeared down the street before Liam could say a word. But just before the girl was carried away, she looked back at him over her mother's shoulder. "Will you come back?" she asked. Liam opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood up slowly, brushed off his knees, and stared at the empty doorway for a long time. On the walk back, the sun was low and orange, casting long shadows ahead of them. Liam and Aisha walked side by side for the first time. Not because he was following her, but because they were going the same direction. He didn't plan the question. It just came. "How long have you been doing this?" Aisha kept walking. Her eyes stayed ahead. "Long enough to know who's going to be hungry tomorrow night." Liam didn't respond. He didn't have anything to say that felt big enough for what he'd just seen. He had walked into Hope Haven that morning as an observer, an outsider calculating risk and gathering evidence. He was walking out of it as something he didn't have a word for yet. All he knew was that the $50 bill still in his wallet felt heavier than it had that morning, and that a volunteer named Donna had told him something that was still ringing in his ears like a bell struck once and left to resonate. "She was here before you knew she existed. Money buys food, but it doesn't buy trust." The sky had been gray all morning, not the soft cinematic gray of movie rain, but the heavy flat kind that sits on a city like a lid and makes everything underneath feel smaller. Aisha checked the weather on her phone before they left. She didn't say anything. She just packed extra plastic bags around the bread. It wasn't enough. The drop that Saturday was a lot behind Hope Haven, an open patch of cracked asphalt where volunteers set up folding tables and lined up bags of food in rows. The system was simple. Families came, checked in with the clipboard, picked up their allocation and left. It worked when the weather was dry. When the sky was clear and the tables stayed level and the bread stayed in the bins where it belonged. Today the sky was not clear. The rain came all at once, not building gradually but arriving like someone had flipped a switch. One moment the air was still and damp. The next water fell in sheets so thick, Liam couldn't see the end of the lot. Volunteers scrambled. Tarps were pulled over tables but the wind caught them and flipped them sideways. Canned goods were fine. Produce survived in bags, but the bread, 4 bins of donated loaves, sliced and bagged, sat on the lowest table, and when the table buckled under a gust, the bins tipped. Bread hit the wet pavement, bags split open. Loaves rolled into puddles, soaking up rainwater and grit. 20 pounds of bread, maybe more, spread across the ground like something discarded. Liam stood under the awning and watched what happened next. The children came, not running, not panicking, calmly, like they had done this before. Liam picked up a loaf and shook off the water. Marcus grabbed 3 bags and stacked them against his chest. Evan, tiny Evan with his oversized coat, knelt in a puddle and picked up slices one by one, brushing off the dirt with his fingers. A boy Liam didn't recognize, maybe 8, picked up a piece of bread from the ground, looked at it, blew on it the way you blow on a scraped knee and bit into it. Liam felt his chest lock. Near the edge of the lot, a girl, 12, maybe 13, held a loaf she'd pulled from the mud. It was the last full loaf on her side of the pavement. She wiped it against her jacket, tore it in half, and handed the bigger piece to a smaller boy standing behind her. Her brother. She kept the smaller piece for herself, and when a volunteer tried to hand her another bag she shook her head. "Give it to someone else," she said. "We're okay." She was not okay. Her jacket was soaked through and her hands were shaking. But she said it with the kind of certainty that comes from being 12 years old and already knowing that someone always has it worse. Liam watched her walk away holding her brother's hand, the smaller piece of bread pressed against her chest to keep it dry. He had no formula for this, no spreadsheet, no metric, no cost-benefit analysis that could contain what he just watched. A child splitting bread in the rain and choosing the smaller half, not because anyone told her to, not because there was a reward, but because her brother was hungrier and she was old enough to know and young enough to act on it without thinking. There was no ROI on that, no line item, no quarterly report that would ever capture the weight of a 12-year-old's hands shaking in the cold while she gave away the only food she had. Everything Liam had ever been taught about value, about how to measure it, maximize it, extract it, went silent. A woman approached the table, mid-30s, rain-plastered hair, a baby on one hip and a toddler clinging to her leg. She asked for a bag. The volunteer checked the list and handed her one. She looked inside, counted. Then I looked up. "Is there any more?" she said. Quiet, almost apologetic. "I have 2 more at home. They're with my neighbor. I couldn't carry everyone in the rain." The volunteer looked at the shelf. The reserve bags were gone, redistributed after the bread fell. There was nothing extra. She shook her head. The woman nodded. That same nod Liam had seen before. The nod of people who had been told no so many times it didn't even register as disappointment anymore. Just information, just another wall. She turned to leave. Liam reached for his wallet, automatic, instinctive, and then stopped. His hand froze on the leather. Money wouldn't help here. There was no store open on this block, no delivery app that serviced this zip code on a Saturday, no amount of cash that could turn into 4 meals in the next 10 minutes. For the first time, he was standing in a place where the thing he had the most of was the thing that mattered the least. Aisha intercepted the woman. Before she reached the gate, she spoke to her quietly. Liam couldn't hear the words, and then walked to the back of the supply room. She came back with a bag she'd assembled from somewhere, packed with cans and rice and a jar of peanut butter. Not from the shelves, from her own reserve. The emergency stash she kept for exactly this. The woman took it with both hands. She didn't say thank you. She just held the bag against her body the way you hold something precious, and walked into the rain. His body reacted before his brain caught up. This shouldn't be happening. His voice cut through the rain, louder than he intended, sharp with something he didn't immediately recognize as rage. He turned to no one, and everyone. Where's the city? Where's the funding? There's supposed to be infrastructure. There's supposed to be a system. The volunteers looked at him. The children looked at him. The rain didn't care. Aisha was already on the ground. She knelt in the same puddle. Evan was kneeling in, picking up bread with both hands, moving with the mechanical calm of someone who had long ago stopped expecting the world to work the way it should. She sorted what was salvageable from what wasn't. She redistributed. She handed a dry loaf to a mother, holding a baby under a garbage bag. She didn't stop. She didn't yell. She didn't look at the sky and ask why. She looked at Liam once. "Anger doesn't fill their stomachs," she said. Then she went back to work. Liam stood in the rain. His jacket was soaked through. His shoes, $300, Italian leather, were ruined. And for the first time in his life, those facts felt like the most irrelevant things in the world. He knelt down, picked up bread, didn't say another word. The rain lasted 45 minutes. When it stopped, the lot looked like a battlefield. Tables overturned, tarps tangled, puddles everywhere. But every family that had come for food, left with something. Not the full allocation, not what they were promised, but something. Because Aisha had made sure of it, the same way she made sure of everything, quietly, efficiently, without waiting for permission or applause. They walked back in silence, the kind of silence that has texture, heavy and fragile at the same time, like wet paper. It was Aisha who spoke first. "When I was 10, she said, eyes straight ahead, voice flat as pavement, my mother lost her job. The warehouse was closed, no severance, no savings. We had about 2 weeks of food in the house, and after that, nothing." Liam listened. He didn't interrupt. Something in her tone told him that this was not a story she told often, or easily, or to just anyone. "There was a church in Greenfield that did food bags on Thursdays. We went every week. My mother would dress us up. Clean clothes, combed hair, like we were going to Sunday service. She didn't want us to feel like we were begging." She paused. A car passed, tires hissing on the wet road, but the kids at school found out. Someone saw us in line. And after that, I was the girl who ate charity food. That was my name for 2 years. Not Aisha, not Johnson. Just the girl who couldn't afford lunch. Her voice didn't crack. It stayed level and controlled, the way it always did. But her hands hanging at her sides, closed into fists, and then opened again, like she was letting something go that she'd been holding for 20 years. "I don't take food from that restaurant because I'm a thief," she said. "I take it because I remember what it feels like to be 9 years old and ashamed of being hungry. And I won't let those kids feel that. Not if I can stop it." Liam didn't speak. He couldn't. Every argument, every calculation, every strategic angle he'd been running, dissolved like the bread in the rain. He was standing next to someone who wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't performing. She wasn't building a case. She was just telling him the truth, and the truth was so plain and so heavy that it didn't need anything else. They reached the corner where their paths split, his toward the apartment his father's company leased, hers toward the building with the broken elevator and the dying light bulbs. She didn't say goodbye, she just nodded and turned. He watched her walk away until she rounded the corner and disappeared. Then he felt his phone vibrate. A text from his father. 4 words, "Have you found the problem at the restaurant yet?" Liam stared at the screen. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto the glass, blurring the letters. He swiped it clear and read it again. He had found the problem. He had documented it. He had timestamps, inventory discrepancies, eyewitness observation, and a clear chain of action. If he compiled it into a report tonight, he could send it to his father by morning. The 3-month sentence would end. He'd be back in the boardroom by Monday. All he had to do was write Aisha's name in a file and attach the evidence. He opened the Notes app on his phone, stared at the blinking cursor, then he closed it, not because he'd made a decision, but because for the first time, the decision didn't feel simple. The math he'd always relied on, risk, reward, outcome, had a variable he'd never accounted for. A woman kneeling in the rain, picking up bread for children who had learned to eat off the ground without complaining. A 12-year-old girl keeping the smaller half for herself. He sat in his car, engine off, rain tapping the roof like a clock counting down to something. "I could end all of this right now," he whispered. He could file the report, win the challenge, go back to his life, or he could do nothing, lose the shortcut, stay in the restaurant for 3 more months. He picked up the phone again. This time he opened the call screen, his father's name at the top of recent contacts. His thumb hovered. He pressed dial. "You can win the challenge, but you'll lose yourself." The phone rang twice before Charles picked up. He always picked up fast. It was a power move, a signal that said he was never too busy, never caught off guard, never the one left waiting. "Liam, Dad." A pause. Liam could hear the soft clink of ice in a glass on the other end. His father was drinking scotch in the study, leather chair, low lamp, the sound of wealth at rest. Liam didn't tell him about the bread, didn't mention the rain, the children, the apartment with the dialysis machine. He couldn't. Those things existed in a language his father had never learned, and would never respect. Instead he asked a question. Hypothetical. Clean. If a manager at one of our properties was taking product off the books, but for a legitimate reason, what would you do? Charles didn't hesitate. Define legitimate. Feeding people. Homeless. Kids. The ice clinked again. The law doesn't have a column for intentions, Liam. Theft is theft. If she's removing inventory without authorization, it's a liability. Legal, financial, reputational, Liam said. He hadn't meant to use the pronoun. Charles caught it immediately. "You found someone." Silence. "Listen to me," Charles said, and his voice shifted into the register Liam had heard his entire life, the boardroom register, the one that made decisions sound like physics, inevitable, unemotional. "You want to lead, you have to choose what's effective over what feels right. Sentiment is a luxury, you can afford it after you've built something. Not before." Liam closed his eyes. "And if the person isn't doing anything wrong, then they won't mind being reported, will they?" Another silence. Longer this time. "You're not a charity, Liam. Neither is this company. If this woman is so righteous, she'll understand. It's just business. Good people don't get to break the rules just because their reasons are pretty." His voice hardened. The Scotch glass set down with a firm clink. "You want to build an empire, learn to cut the sentiment, cut the hesitation, cut the people who make you feel instead of think. That's how your grandfather built this, that's how I kept it, and that's how you'll earn it, if you're capable." The word capable landed like a slap dressed as a handshake. The call ended. No goodbye. His father never said goodbye. He just stopped talking when he was finished, and the silence was your cue to hang up. Liam sat in his car for a long time after that. The rain had stopped, but water still ran along the gutters,
carrying leaves and cigarette butts toward the drain. The windshield fogged from his breathing. He drove home, not to Aisha's neighborhood, to his apartment, the one his father's company leased in a high-rise downtown, the kind of building with a doorman and a gym and a view of the skyline that was supposed to make you feel like you'd already made it. The elevator was silent and fast. The hallway smelled like nothing. The door unlocked with a fingerprint. Inside, everything was exactly where he'd left it. Clean counters, a bottle of bourbon on the kitchen island, half full, 2 crystal glasses, one still in the cabinet, the other out, always just one, because no one else was ever here. He poured a drink, set it on the counter. I looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He sat down at the kitchen island, opened his laptop, and started typing. The report wrote itself. He'd been composing it in his head for days without admitting it. The inventory gaps, the timestamps, the pattern of removal. Food leaves the system every night between 10:15 and 10:40. Always the same categories: proteins, starches, prepared sides, always within the disposal window, always handled by the same person. He typed her name, Aisha Johnson, floor manager, employee ID 4471. He added the financial summary, estimated value of diverted product, $200, $350 per week. Annual impact approximately $14,000, not large enough to threaten the business, large enough to justify termination. He wrote the recommendation line, immediate suspension pending formal review, termination recommended. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence. He read it back. The words were clean, professional, accurate. They described everything that had happened, and nothing that mattered. He imagined sending it. His father read it over morning coffee, nodding once, the way he nodded when numbers confirmed what he already believed. A phone call to the restaurant's HR department, a meeting in the back office. Aisha sitting across from someone in a suit, being told that her employment was terminated effective immediately. Her face, the same face that hadn't flinched when a drunk man stormed into a shelter, the same face that stayed calm when children ate bread off the ground, going still, not surprised, just confirmed. He imagined her walking out the back door one last time. No cloth bag, no containers, just her coat and her keys, and the walk home to an apartment where the bills were already read, and the fridge was already empty. He imagined Miles checking the tuition portal, and finding it locked, the dialysis machine beeping its thin beep in a room that no longer had a paycheck coming. He imagined the kids at the gate on Saturday night, Leah, Marcus, Evan, standing in the dark, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. His finger hovered over the delete key. He didn't press it. He closed the laptop, slowly, the way you close a door you're not sure you want to lock. The report was still there. Her name was still there. The recommendation line, termination recommended, still glowed behind the dark screen like something buried but not dead. He didn't feel relieved. He didn't feel noble. He felt like a man holding a loaded gun. He hadn't decided whether to fire, and the safety was off, and the morning was coming whether he was ready or not. He stood up, grabbed his keys, drove, not home, not to the restaurant. He drove south, past downtown, past the commercial district, past the blocks where the streetlights worked and the sidewalks were smooth. He drove until the roads narrowed and the buildings sagged and the only light came from bodegas and laundromats that never closed. He parked across the street from Hope Haven. The building was dark. The lot was empty. The folding tables were gone, stacked inside somewhere, still damp from the rain. The hand-painted sign by the door was barely visible in the glow of a streetlight 2 poles down. He sat in his car and looked at it. This was where she came every week. This parking lot, this building, this neighborhood that his father's company would never invest in because the returns didn't justify the risk. This was where bread fell on the ground and children picked it up and no one called the city because the city had already made it clear it wasn't coming. And tomorrow morning, Aisha would show up again. She'd pack containers, check labels, sort fruit by hand. She'd remember who was allergic to what, and whose count had changed and which family had a new baby. She'd do it all on 4 hours of sleep with a stack of final notices on her kitchen table, and she wouldn't complain because complaining requires believing someone is listening. Liam turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed.
He sat there a moment longer, headlights cutting across the empty lot, illuminating nothing but cracked asphalt and a puddle still holding the reflection of a streetlight. He drove back to his apartment, parked, rode the elevator up. I walked in, stood in the middle of his living room, 700 square feet of silence and clean surfaces and not a single thing on the walls that he'd chosen himself. He didn't sleep. He lay on top of the covers in his clothes staring at the ceiling, running 2 timelines in his head. In one he opened the laptop, hit send, ended the 3 months, and returned to the version of his life where food was something you ordered and poverty was something you read about. In the other he deleted the file, said nothing. The 3 months dragged on and he spent the rest of them watching a woman do what the entire system couldn't: feed people who had been forgotten. One timeline was easy, the other was right, and for the first time in Liam's life, those 2 things were not the same. Morning came the way it always does, without asking permission. He showered, dressed, picked up the laptop from the kitchen island, held it under his arm. He drove to the Silver Crest early, before the prep crew arrived, before the ovens were on, before the first ticket printed. The restaurant was quiet in a way it never was during service, just the hum of refrigerators and the distant tick of the clock above the pass. He stood in the dining room for a moment, looking at the empty tables, the polished silverware, the flowers in their little glass vases. Everything here was designed to make people feel important. Every detail is curated, every surface gleaming. He thought about the folding tables at Hope Haven, the flickering fluorescent light, the whiteboard with its color-coded list of hungry families. The laptop sat on the bar beside him. The file was still inside, her name was still in it. Then he walked to the kitchen phone and called the front desk. "Tell Aisha Johnson to come to the dining floor, now." The host hesitated. "Is everything, just tell her." He hung up, straightened his jacket. I stood in the middle of the empty dining room and waited. Within minutes the staff that had arrived early began whispering. Word traveled fast in restaurants, always had, always would. By the time Aisha appeared through the kitchen doors, every set of eyes in the building was on her. She walked out in her uniform, notebook in hand, posture straight. She looked at Liam standing in the center of the dining room, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, not fear, but recognition. The look of someone who had been waiting for a shoe to drop and finally heard it hit the floor. She stopped 3 feet from him. Their eyes met. He said, "I think it's time to tell the truth." The file was still on his laptop, and Liam still hadn't decided what to do with it. There are decisions that don't change your job. They change who you are. Friday night at the Silver Crest was a machine at full throttle. Every table was occupied, every seat filled. Waiters moved between tables with the rehearsed grace of ballet dancers carrying soup. The bar was 3 deep, cocktail shakers keeping rhythm with the jazz. Laughter floated over the hum of conversation, and the chandeliers scattered their tiny prisms across the room like confetti made of light. The kitchen was louder, faster, every burner lit, every station was manned. Tickets printed in a steady stream, and the expeditor's voice cracked through the noise like a metronome. Into the peak of Friday service, with 112 covers on the floor and a wait list that stretched to the sidewalk. Liam Harrington walked to the center of the dining room and stopped. He didn't raise his hand, he didn't tap a glass. He just stood there, and something about the way he stood made the nearest tables go quiet first, then the next ring, then the next. Like a stone dropped in still water, silence rippled outward until even the bartender stopped shaking. "I need the floor manager," Liam said. Not loud, but clear. "Aisha Johnson." A waiter near the kitchen doors glanced back. A busboy froze mid-reach for a bread basket. The hostess at the front podium lowered her phone. Whispers traveled at the speed of gossip. "Is this an audit? Who is that guy? Isn't he the new hire from corporate?" From the kitchen Aisha emerged. She had heard her name through the pass-through window, had seen the dining room go still through the porthole in the kitchen door. She walked out with her shoulders square and her notebook still in her left hand, a pen clipped to the cover. Her face was composed, controlled, but her eyes were tight at the corners. "The only sign." She spoke before he could. "If this is about the food," she said, and her voice carried across the silent dining room with the same calm authority it carried in the kitchen. "I take full responsibility." The room held its breath. She continued, "I have been taking food from the disposal line. Nothing that could be reserved, nothing that was sold or accounted for on the active menu. Items marked for waste. I brought them to people who needed them. She paused, looked at the faces looking at her. Waiters, diners, the bartender with his shaker still in hand. I didn't sell anything. I didn't profit. I took what this restaurant was going to throw away, and I gave it to children and families who would have gone to sleep hungry without it. She stopped. She didn't add anything. No defense, no excuse, no request for mercy. Just the facts, laid out on the white tablecloths like a hand of cards she'd been holding too long. A woman at table 6 set down her wine glass. The silence was so complete that Liam could hear the ice cracking in someone's water. Then he spoke. "Before we go any further," he said, "I should introduce myself properly." He looked across the room. "My name is Liam Harrington. My father is Charles Harrington. He owns this restaurant and the 11 others in the group." A spoon hit the floor somewhere near the back. No one picked it up. The staff, the servers, the bussers, the hostess, the line cooks peering through the kitchen window, went rigid. The guy they'd known as the quiet new corporate observer, the one who asked too many questions about inventory and stayed late reading reports, was the owner's son. Aisha didn't move, but the color left her face in a single slow wave, like a tide pulling back from shore. Her hand tightened around her notebook until the pen clip dug into her palm. She thought one thing. "It's over," Liam continued. His voice was steady, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there before. A crack in the polish, a tremor in the foundation. "Over the past 2 weeks, I identified a discrepancy in our food waste metrics. Output didn't match disposal. Product was leaving the system without authorization." He paused. "Let the words settle. I investigated. I followed the trail, and I found the person responsible." He looked at Aisha. The entire room looked at Aisha. She looked back at him, jaw set, eyes dry, ready for whatever came next because she'd been ready for it from the first night she zipped that cloth bag shut. "I know exactly who did this," Liam said. The room leaned in. The jazz had stopped. The kitchen had gone silent. Even the ticket printer seemed to hold its breath. Liam reached behind him to the bar where he'd set his laptop before walking to the floor. He opened it, turned the screen toward the room, toward Aisha, so she could see the document, her name, her employee ID, the timestamps, the financial summary, and at the bottom, in clean black type, termination recommended. Aisha read it. Her lips parted just slightly, then closed. She didn't look away. A server near the kitchen door covered her mouth. A busboy whispered to the dishwasher, "She's done." Liam spoke again. "I wrote this report last night. Every number is accurate. Every observation is documented. This file contains everything my father would need to terminate her employment immediately." He paused. "It's still on this laptop. I haven't sent it." The dining room was so quiet that the hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen bled through the walls. Aisha stood perfectly still. Her notebook hung at her side. Her eyes were fixed on Liam, and in them was not anger, not fear, just the flat, exhausted calm of a woman who had always known this moment would come and had made peace with it long before it arrived. A diner at table 9 leaned to his wife and whispered, "He's going to fire her." The wife didn't respond. She was watching Aisha's face. Liam closed the laptop. He looked at Aisha, then in the room, then back at Aisha. "Just do it." "But that's not why I'm standing here tonight." 1B2. Aisha blinked. "I'm not here to find someone to blame." The sentence landed like a change in air pressure, not loud, but felt. The tension didn't break, it shifted, hung there suspended between what everyone expected and what no one could yet see. Liam looked at the room, at the diners in their pressed shirts and cocktail dresses, at the staff in their aprons and bow ties, at Aisha standing alone under the chandelier light with her worn notebook and her clean conscience. "There are truths," he said, "that aren't meant to be exposed. They're meant to be changed." He turned toward the kitchen doors and then back to the room. He wasn't finished, but that what came next was the part that changed everything. Liam stood in the same spot, same chandelier above him, same silent room around him, but something in his posture had shifted. His shoulders were lower, his hands unclenched. He looked like a man who had just set something heavy down. "This restaurant throws away between 15 and 25 pounds of food every night," he said. "Perfectly good food, prepared, plated, untouched and dumped.
That's the industry standard. That's what every restaurant in this city does, because the system is designed for waste, not for people. He let that land. One person in this building decided that was unacceptable. Not by writing a memo, not by filing a complaint, by doing something about it. Every night, after close, she took what we were going to throw in the trash and brought it to families who had nothing. He looked at Aisha. She didn't ask permission, because the system didn't have a place for what she was doing. There was no policy for compassion, no form to fill out for feeding hungry children, so she did it anyway. Quietly, alone, at personal risk, Aisha stood completely still. Her eyes glistened, but nothing fell. Not yet. The fault, Liam said, isn't hers. The fault is that this restaurant, my family's restaurant, built a system so rigid that the only way to do the right thing was to break the rules. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it and held it up. Effective immediately, the Silver Crest will implement a food rescue program. All food that is prepared but unsold that meets safety and quality standards will be packaged and donated to local shelters and community organizations. Legally, officially, every night. The room was still. Second, he refolded the paper but kept talking. We are establishing a medical assistance fund for employees and their families. Any staff member facing medical hardship can apply for support. No one who works for this company should have to choose between their health and their paycheck. Someone at a table near the window put their hand over their mouth. Third, every Friday, this dining room will open for community night. The same tables, the same kitchen, the same food, free of charge, for anyone in the neighborhood who needs a meal. Not a handout, a seat at the table. He paused and turned to Aisha. The whole room turned with him. And fourth, Aisha Johnson is being promoted to operations manager of the Silver Crest, effective today. Not because of what she did in the shadows, because of who she is in the light. For the first time he spoke directly to her. You don't have to sneak around to do the right thing anymore. And that was when Aisha's composure, the composure that had held through late nights and empty fridges and hospital bills and children eating in the dark, finally broke. Not dramatically, not with sound, just one tear, then another, tracking down her cheeks in clean, silent lines. She wasn't crying because of the promotion. She wasn't crying because of the policy. She was crying because someone had finally seen what she'd been doing and said, out loud, in front of everyone, that it mattered. The first clap came from the back of the room. A line cook, still in his apron, standing in the kitchen doorway, then a waiter, then a table near the bar, then the whole room, diners standing, staff applauding, the bartender setting down his shaker to join. It wasn't the polished performative applause of a gala or a fundraiser. It was raw and uneven and real. A woman at table 3 was recording on her phone. She would post it that night with a caption that read, CEO's son admits system failure, change everything on the spot. It would get 2 million views in 3 days, but that was later. In this moment, in the warm light of the dining room, under the chandeliers that had witnessed 1,000 expensive dinners and never anything like this, the sound that filled the room was the sound of people recognizing something they hadn't expected to find in a place like this. Honesty. Aisha wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Liam. He looked at her. Neither of them smiled. It wasn't a smiling moment. It was something deeper than that. The quiet, steady recognition between two people who had changed each other without meaning to. That night, after the last table cleared and the kitchen shut down and the chairs were stacked, Liam sat alone at the bar. His phone rang. The screen said DAD. He picked up. Well, Charles said, I handled it. Did you report the violation? Liam looked at the empty dining room, the flowers in their vases, the chandelier light catching the edge of a glass someone had forgotten to clear. I fixed it, he said, silence on the other end. Long enough for Liam to count to 5, then Charles spoke, slowly, carefully, like a man rearranging something in his head. The test was never about finding who was wrong, Liam. Liam waited. It was about whether you had the nerve to do what was right, even when the easy answer was sitting right in front of you. Another pause. You passed. You can leave the restaurant. Liam looked at the Silver Crest through the window behind the bar. The gleaming sign, the warm light, the street outside where Aisha walked every night with a cloth bag full of someone else's survival. "I'm not ready to leave," he said. Charles said nothing for a moment. Then good. The call ended. Liam set the phone on the bar, picked up the bourbon he'd ordered an hour ago and never touched, poured it back into the bottle. He didn't need it. Outside, the restaurant sign glowed silver in the dark, and taped to the window, handwritten on a plain white card in Aisha's neat precise lettering, were 4 words: Community Night. Everyone belongs. She didn't need saving, she needed to be seen. 3 months later, the silver crest still gleamed. The chandeliers still scattered their tiny rainbows across white tablecloths. The jazz still played low on weeknights, and the bar still poured cocktails that cost more than some people's groceries. But every Friday, at exactly 5 o'clock, the sign in the window changed. A new sign, simple, hand-lettered, laminated because it had been rained on too many times, read, Community Night. All are welcome. The line started forming at 4:30. They came from every direction. Construction workers still in steel-toed boots, cement dust on their jeans, single mothers with toddlers on their hips and older kids holding the door, elderly men who lived alone and hadn't eaten at a table with other people in months, teenagers from the group home 2 blocks past Lincoln, the same one with the iron gate where Aisha had knelt in the dark. They didn't line up the way people line up at shelters, shuffling, eyes down, waiting to be processed. They walked in through the front door. The hostess greeted them by name, because after 12 weeks she knew most of them. They sat at the same tables, ate from the same kitchen, and drank water from the same glasses. No one looked at anyone with pity. That was the rule Aisha had insisted on from the first night. If it feels like charity, she had said, we've already failed. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like Friday. The changes beyond community night were quieter but just as real. The medical fund had processed its first 11 applications in 10 weeks. A dishwasher named Gerald got his daughter's dental surgery covered. A line cook named Maria started physical therapy for a shoulder injury she'd been hiding for 2 years because she couldn't afford to miss a shift. The food rescue program ran every night now, officially logged, fully compliant. What used to leave the building in a cloth bag under cover of darkness is now left through the front door in branded boxes with the Silver Crest's logo on the side. Aisha still oversaw it personally, every night. She ran the program the same way she ran the kitchen, precise, tireless, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Her mother was doing better, not cured. Dialysis doesn't cure, it manages, but stable, consistently stable. For the first time in 2 years, Miles went back to school full-time. New laptop, donated by the restaurant's employee fund. He didn't talk about it much. He just studied, the way he always had, except now the Wi-Fi worked and the screen didn't freeze every 10 minutes. Marcus had new shoes. Not flashy, just new. Leah joined a soccer league, a free community program that practiced Thursday evenings at the park near Lincoln. She scored 3 goals in her first game and told Aisha about every single one of them, twice. Evan still wore his oversized coat, but it was clean now, and underneath it he had a new shirt with a dinosaur on it that he refused to take off, even to sleep. Liam didn't stand at the front of community night. He didn't give speeches, he worked the floor, bussing tables, refilling water, carrying trays from the kitchen. He learned the names of the regulars the way Aisha had always known them, not from a list, but from repetition, from showing up. One Friday, near the end of the night, the dining room almost empty, Liam stood beside Aisha near the front window. "You still sneaking food out the back?" he asked. Aisha looked at him, a small smile, barely there, just the corners of her mouth lifting. "No," she said. He looked up at the light above the door. The silver fixture that had buzzed and flickered for months, finally replaced. "It is burning steadily now, clean, and even." The front door opened. A small girl, the same girl from the food distribution, the one who had grabbed Liam's hand and asked if he'd come back, ran in. She was wearing a jacket that fit this time, and her shoes had laces she'd tied herself, unevenly, proudly. She ran straight to Liam, and wrapped her arms around his leg. "You came back," she said, looking up at him with the kind of certainty that only children have, the belief that if someone said they'd be there they would be. Liam knelt down, eye level, and he said the only thing that mattered. "Yeah, I'm here." She smiled and ran off to find her mother, who was sitting at table 4, eating soup with a spoon she didn't have to return. Outside, the city moved the way cities always move, fast, loud, indifferent. But inside, the Silver Crest, the light stayed steady, and somewhere in this city tonight, a child would eat dinner at a table, instead of in the dark. Some lights don't need to shine bright, they just need to shine long enough that someone doesn't have to eat in the dark.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.